Honored to be with you today. If truth be told, I asked Charles if I might deliver the message because I wanted to address the issue of justice. Without hesitation, he willingly agreed. The title of my message today is, "What is the Lord asking of us?" And let us begin with a moment of silence and reflection. Dear Lord, may the words from my lips and the meditations of our hearts be ever acceptable in thy sight. O Lord, our strength and Redeemer. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. This is an excerpt from a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., delivered in a sermon on courage. This quote, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about what matters," has led me to consider what truly matters when we consider justice. Before I continue, I realize that the word justice can cause anguish for some and inspire others. When I speak of justice, I think of the embodiment of justice, peace, and the genuine respect for humanity. Consider this scenario: equity and peace in our nation and between nations. Equity and genuine respect in our communities and between communities. Equity in our homes and institutions. And equity in our lives and for all humanity. In each of these examples, I am not talking about the image of Lady Justice, represented by a blindfolded lady holding the scales of justice, nor am I referring to the actions of the U.S. Supreme Court. My intent is for us to embody justice politically as well as reverently. After all, justice appears 328 times in the Bible. Are we not a just congregation? My response will always be, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter, and justice matters. What matters are the responses that we choose to make as a just congregation. What matters is loving our neighbor, regardless of race, ethnicity, or immigration status. What matters is understanding the meaning of an LGBTQ congregation, embracing that we have marriages between men and marriages between women. What matters is knowing God and His Word. I want to speak with you openly this morning about justice. As I prepared to speak candidly, I wondered, will the word and focus on justice make us a little uncomfortable? But it's important to be reminded that the entire church calendar, we only have one day dedicated to justice, and that is today, Human Relations Sunday. The Sunday that always makes me recall the New Testament book of Micah, and specifically Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. When I first moved to Durham, I was invited to audition for the organist position at Elizabeth Street United Methodist Church. I remember that during my interview for the church position, I was specifically asked whether I knew what a reconciling church was, and I said no. So I was handed a bulletin, and this church bulletin, the statement that we are referring to, Elizabeth Street United Methodist Church declares itself a reconciling congregation, seeking to welcome all persons, regardless of economic status, age, race, ethnicity, disability, gender, or sexual orientation, into the discipleship of Christian living, and proclaim our commitment to seek the reconciliation of all persons to God and to each other through Jesus Christ. I used this interview opportunity to share more of who I am and what I bring to this church. I shared with the interviewers the following. In 1985, I began working at the University of Pennsylvania, which had one of the first LGBTQ student centers in the country. And now, almost 20 years later, the LGBTQ Center is one of the 7 cultural centers for which I am responsible at Duke University. The other centers are the International House, the Jewish Center, the Muslim Center, the Women's Center, the Center for Black Culture, the Multicultural Center, and the LGBTQ Center, whose name was later changed to the Center for Sexual and Gender Diversity. More important for you to know is that I believe we are all God's children. A beloved member of this congregation, Mr. Buddy Dean, said to me as he accompanied me to my car, "I just know that you're going to get this job." And yes, I was thrilled that my prayer was answered. This was a church where Pastor Lori Hayes Kaufman invited a group of LGBTQ parishioners to worship in the fellowship hall on Sunday evenings. After several weeks of their meetings on Sunday evenings, the minister invited the group of LGBTQ parishioners to join her in the Sunday morning service. Half the congregation left and never returned. This was a group that had not yet expanded its awareness. I wondered again, when will it be comfortable enough to talk about justice? Prior to coming to Duke University, I have been blessed to have led student affairs in 4 major universities. On each campus, there has always been an acknowledgement of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., even before it was a national holiday. At Duke, a committee always brought well-known speakers to the Duke Chapel to commemorate Dr. King. Over time, I have noticed that we seem to move further and further away from the great civil rights icon. the places like the church, even though Dr. King was a minister, a visionary, and a champion for justice. Take, for example, the United Methodist Church. Every year, we refer to this Sunday as Human Relations Sunday, rarely mentioning Dr. King's name. It is not an accident that Human Relations Sunday always comes before the official holiday, the day of observance of Dr. King. Reminiscing on these words brings focus to today's message and inspires me to ask two questions. When will Dr. King's dream ever be realized? And what is the responsibility that Elizabeth Street United Methodist Church must fulfill to make Dr. King's dream a reality? I joyfully accepted the role of organist and worked at this church for 5 wonderful years until I decided to join my parents at Epworth United Methodist Church in 2008. One day, I met a former white colleague in Harris Teeter who said, "Zoila, I think I'm going to visit your church because of the sign I saw outside the church." I asked, which sign are you referring to? She said, "The sign about racism." I asked whether you were sure that it was my church. And she said, "Yes, Epworth, that's your church, right?" I said yes and decided to drive by the church. And to my surprise, I saw the sign, and I was pleasantly surprised. I realized that I attended a church where differences are not swept under the rug, and people care for one another and work diligently to serve a diverse community. Epworth United Methodist Church is a church I am deeply proud of. I think about how we as Christians want to know what the Lord is asking of us. Our response has always been journeying toward justice. Charles is a member, or was a member, of the Journeying Toward Justice group. Several years ago, Epworth, a predominantly white church, joined with Mount Level Missionary Baptist Church, a predominantly African-American church, in Durham, over Zoom, for 6 weeks to study the best-selling and controversial book, Caste: The Origins of Our Discontent, by Isabel Wilkerson. The author argued that America functions as a rigid, inherited caste system, like those in India and Nazi Germany, where society is divided into a strict hierarchy with white people at the top and people of African descent at the bottom. It was inspiring for me to see Epworth members deeply engaged in multiracial discussions during our book studies. There were also other members from churches in Durham, Georgia, Virginia, and New Jersey who attended our JTJ programs, and the richness of diversity, of mindsets and geography broadened our discussions. We often came to know that it was pain, and we shared this in common when speaking of injustice. We also came to know that we can manifest love for one another regardless of race, gender, identity, economic status, or country of origin. Our work together was further illuminated with some of the following speakers. Dean of Duke Chapel, Dr. Reverend Luke Powery, sang familiar spirituals and explained the coded language which slaves used to talk about escaping through the Underground Railroad. Dr. Powery was joined by several other scholars. Dr. Damon Tweedy, a Duke psychiatrist who wrote the book titled Black Man in a White Coat. He explained the discrimination he encountered at Duke Medical School. At the beginning of the book, Dr. Tweedy described the beginning of his career at Duke Medicine. One day in class, he was asked by a Duke professor of medicine if he were the maintenance man who had come to change the light bulb. Richard Rothstein, the author of the book, The Color of Law, The Forgotten History of How the Government Segregated America. The church was packed that day. Everyone wanted to hear Mr. Rothstein speak of the silence, the mystery, and the mastery of how segregation really works. It is not an accident, but very intentionally. Bishop Will Willimon from Duke Divinity School spoke about overcoming racism. And I will never forget Bishop Willimon, how he began his talk. He told us that he went to Germany to attend a conference, and he met another German pastor. And he said to him, "You and I have a lot in common. We are both descendants of people who mistreated others. Your ancestors mistreated Jewish people, and my ancestors mistreated slaves." Talk about introducing the topic of justice. Those of us who attended the program were sitting on the edge of our seats. What threaded the 10-year initiative was the program which my sister Angela and I presented as a 3-week Lenten series on the impact of race, power, and privilege. As I speak these 3 words, I want to remind you of the title of my talk this morning. What is the Lord asking of us? I want you to know that I recently had to answer the same question. Several years ago, Dean Edna Andrews, the dean of the Focus program at Duke, called me to ask whether I would be willing to teach a new course titled Critical Race Theory to Duke freshmen. Given the political climate, I was shocked and told her I needed to think about this, and I actually needed to pray about it. For me, this was a matter of justice, but I believed God would guide me. I ended up with ethnically and racially diverse classes of students, and must admit that it was the most rewarding teaching experience of my career because of my ability to shape the next generation of leaders and scholars. In the first class, I asked the students who they would bring to join the class for the semester. I told the class it could be anybody, a famous person, dead or alive, fictitious or imaginary. One student said to me, I would bring my uncle because he is the former governor of a state, and he does not understand race, power, or privilege. And he needs to better understand this to become a better leader. Another student said, I would bring my mother because she has never had a conversation with me about racial justice. Critical race theory is a lens to examine inequities in our society. I wanted to make sure to dispel many of the myths that were being promoted in the news media. By the end of the semester, students applied the lens of critical race theory to identify injustices in education, the law, employment, housing, healthcare, the environment, and even the church. Faculty told me they were glad that critical race theory course was being taught because for them, the question and the resolution were about justice. But today, many courses in critical race theory have been discontinued or silenced in our public libraries, in high schools, colleges, and universities. Today, I am delighted that freshmen from Duke are with us. And I will invite each of us to consider the following. Who in your life is missing from the congregation on this Unity Day Sunday? Who needs to hear this sermon? I'd like for each of us to consider or remember where you were during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom on August 28, 1963. As Dr. King shared his vision of what it would mean for America to be a great nation, we are reminded of how justice prevails. I would like to share with you what I consider to be the most inspirational memory I have of Dr. King's speech, because it will lead us to two more important questions. So even though we face the challenges of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. There are so many issues we encounter every day. It is sometimes difficult to focus on race, power, and privilege. And it is often considered the foundation of justice. With the new administration, we are entering a pivotal year, a new era where matters of reconciliation, critical race theory, historical and reverent places of worship are under attack, and readings, scholarships, DEI funding, and our historic infrastructure are being dismantled. Evening news are brittle against the backdrop of Dr. King's dream, and I know we each will need to work more intentionally, more fervently, and pray more fervently as we watch the accumulated impacts of justice, as we watch the accumulated impacts of Venezuelan boats, as we watch the accumulated impacts of ICE raids in our cities, where families are being separated and the whereabouts of detainees and even American citizens of color are now scattered among former detainee centers in Texas and throughout South America, Sudan, and Somalia, where the president's reconstruction of the People's House will become a new ballroom, where the gender and sexual violence of teenage girls by Jeffrey Epstein and his friends in high places are now commonplace whispers. The accounts of the brutal crackdown in Iran, the violence in Gaza, Palestinians facing genocide, and the Hanukkah terror attacks in Sydney, Australia. In light of these tragedies, even newscasters caution us to take a break as we watch these intentional impacts of fatigue, dismay, fading the reality of Dr. King's dream. One crisis of injustice after another prevails. The accumulated impacts of these crises are intended for us to forget about the dream, forget about economic injustice, forget about climate injustice, food insecurity injustice, gender equity injustice, developing the next generation, and the disappearance of Black and brown people in this country, which again is the disappearance of race, power, and privilege that we have fought for since the beginning of this country. It wasn't too distant a memory that our country was massacred, leaving Native Americans to scatter, leaving Japanese immigrants entrapped, and now leaving people of color to be isolated and a nation impoverished. His dream will prevail because God intends for this civilization to prevail. God intends for us to remember that we have suffered this violence before. We are determined more than ever to not only keep Dr. King's dream, but to live into God's dream. Keep God's dream alive. I am reminded that the song Amazing Grace was written by a slave crossing the ocean to America. Let us know that we have the strength, the moral fiber, the holiness of God's mercy, and His grace for us to not relinquish Martin Luther King's dream. Micah tells us in chapter 6:8 that what the Lord requires of us is to act justly by being impartial, love mercy by combining an inward disposition and outward action of compassion and kindness, and walk humbly with our God. Through God's grace, we are empowered to serve enabling us to walk with those who are poor in spirit, weak in body, and lost in spirit and soul. We are not only blessed by God, but we are expected to bless others. In closing, when we recognize our commitment to justice as a way of righteousness, equity, and morality, we understand our survival as a people, as a church, and as a nation. The world is anxiously awaiting for us. How will you respond? Amen. Whew. Thank you. So we are going to now sing